Welcome and welcome to Morten. My name is Katrine Hoff. I work at Spotlight with the Danish market. We're very excited that we're able to have this smaller and in-depth webinar and to share some of the experiences that Morten from Fluoguide has had. I'm looking forward to this. The webinar will take approximately 45 minutes and is recorded. And it's a good idea to mute your mic if you're not speaking. Emma Damhag from Spotlight is also present and will be helping me and Morten with some of the technical aspects. And if you have questions, please send them to Emma in the chat function and she will then gather them for a Q&A. Before we go to the exciting part of Fluoguide's learnings, I'll give a brief introduction to Spotlight. So if we go to the first slide of Spotlights, I can see that Spotlight is a marketplace for growth companies, and we're based in Sweden, and we have companies listed from several different countries, primarily Sweden and Denmark. And the market cap of the companies varies greatly, and so does the industry. We, however, also see a great interest from companies listed in the healthcare segment, such as Fluoguide, and also a big interest from tech companies. If we go to slide 2, we can see that Spotlight, we focus only on growth companies, and we have a very active marketplace where the companies are able to IPO and also raise capital as they grow. We have approximately 170 companies listed, and in 2019, 61 of these companies raised capital in secondary or third rounds. So it's a very active market that we have built. At the next slide, we'll describe a little bit more about what Spotlight is, our core. In brief, we focus only on growth companies, and the trading is retail-driven together with long-term institutional investors. And we've tailored our offer to the need of these growth companies. This means that we provide visibility packages and extra guidance when it comes to information that should be given to the market. And we support our companies beyond the first day of trading. And the Danish companies that list as Spotlight, companies such as Fluoguide, they are offered to list as a Danish aktieselskab, and they are traded in Danish kroners, and they address both Danish and Swedish investors in a structured manner through our visibility services and media collaborations in both Denmark and Sweden. We do this because it's our experience that this increases the awareness about the company, and it provides very good possibilities for addressing a larger base of investors with a strong interest in this segment. If we go to the next slide, there is this question that I quite often get is, when should you list? There is no correct answer to this. It varies greatly, also depending on industry. But Spotlight's platform is very scalable. The companies sometimes IPO quite early, then typically raising a smaller amount. And sometimes, on the other hand, they're quite far in their development journey and then raising a larger amount. But we also see that many companies, when they IPO, they have reached a level of scalability. A second question that we get quite often is why a company should list. And to that, I would say it's actually much more interesting to hear Morten's considerations in relation to this. And there are many aspects to it. But I will say that I often hear companies saying that the future path for additional capital raises are more structured, and they find it to be more founder-friendly, also when they should carry out the company strategy. They also experience a higher awareness about the company. And this is relevant in many aspects, also when it comes to, for example, human relations. I spoke to a CEO of one of our listed companies just recently, and he mentioned that they, prior to the listing, had been looking for a CFO and a head of sales for quite some time. And they had not been able to attract the right people. But then with the IPO, now they have employed people that he had not really dared to dream of. So an IPO gives many possibilities. And with that said, I will give the word to Morten Albrechtsen, the CEO of Fluoguide. I look very much forward to this. And I will also say to you, Morten, congratulations with all the positive development that your Fluoguide team has experienced. I think it's a very impressive work that you've done.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and that kind word, Katrine. That's very much appreciated. Do you want me just to go straight into the presentation, and should I do that now?
Let's just do that, and then we'll take the questions afterwards.
Perfectly fine. Good. But then I will just start out giving a short introduction to Fluoguide itself, do it very short, and then I will go back and take some of the considerations we had for our listings and why we choose Spotlight as we did. But first, Fluoguide, what we're doing is that we maximize the surgical outcome, and we do that by intelligent surgery. And our first area we would like to improve is oncology surgery. And really the key point here is that about 15 million patients every year have cancer, and about 80% of them will need a surgery during their time of the disease. And the problem is that the surgeon will only have the hands and the eyes, and they're not able to see all the cancer, and particularly not in the area around the cancer where it kind of is very close to the normal tissue. And our solution to that is developing a product that binds to the cancer and light it up so the surgeon can see it and then much better can remove the cancer and just the cancer. So we start out in glioblastoma as a very aggressive brain cancer, and we have just to start our first clinical study, which will be a proof of concept study for our first product, and that will I'll come back to that. And one of the very interesting thing that we're seeing that the investor has appreciated with Fluoguide is that we have a relatively short time to the market, we have a high scalability, and we have the life science large potential. And the UPAR, which is the target we are pursuing, is generally relevant for all oncology surgery, and it means that we have a market potential of more than 3 million procedures per year, and we listed in 19. And should I do anything here? Yeah, great, thanks. Our product is a very simple one. It's injected during the surgery or in fact right before the surgery, and then it's circulated in the body. It binds to the cells that expresses UPAR, which is a very cancer-specific target. And then during the surgery, the surgeon makes it fluorescent, and they can see the cancer, and then they can remove it very precisely. And quite importantly is that this has benefit for all the stakeholders. So it's the patients, of course, it's the surgeon that makes it better to do what they already are doing, hospital because they save money, but also quite importantly is the equipment manufacturers. And often very good ideas can be killed on the way because there are big players out in the market that don't want to see them succeed. But actually we have a very good situation in the sense that the big players actually like us to succeed because we make their equipment better. So we have tailwind, I will say, for all the stakeholders, which is quite important. And if I get the next one. Yeah. And as I said, we have a very short time to the market compared to a life science product. I know it can be different from an IT company or in many other kind of companies. From a life science company, we have a very short time to the market. And that is particularly the reason because we have the patients are treated very shortly, so they're included, and then 4 weeks after we have the result from a pathology that looks at what the surgeon have removed and actually validate that they removed cancer. We have relatively few patients that we need to include compared to a general standard, and then we have no competition of the patient out in the site. It's a key issue for many oncology development projects and products that actually they're competing for the patient, and that can be quite hard to compete against one of the big pharmaceutical companies when they do clinical trials. But actually in Fluoguide we have no competition because we can just be used for any patient that have the surgery. We just put on top of it and we can be used. So that is essence this one, and I think if I can have the next one, it just I'll do that very short, but it's our clinical trial that is a key trigger point for increasing in value for the next 12 months. And It's a classical drug development product, or we can say trial. So we start with a phase 1 phase, which is the safety that it has to be fine there. Quite importantly for Fluoguide is that we also have a proof of concept in this phase. So that means that we actually show that our product works in humans. Then we select the optimal dose, and we move into a phase 2 part where we actually have a magnitude of benefit demonstrated. So that means that we get an idea of how good our product will be compared to the current standard, and that will very much set the price that we can get in the end of the approval. But also it have a very huge impact on the value in the company. So this study, of course, is extremely important for us. We have 2 sites, one in Denmark, one in Sweden, and there will be up to 36 patients that will be treated in the 2 groups. And the key outcome of it is, as I mentioned, I mean, we'll prove the safety. We get a proof of concept. We actually show that uPAR will work in oncology surgery, and we get an idea of the value of our first product in glioblastoma. And then last but not least, we test some of the pivotal design elements which is needed for the study we need to get approval or use for approval. And it always, I mean, there's a big risk of failing in the phase 3 program because you have not done the pivotal design or tested that good enough. We already do the design exactly similar as you want to do in the phase 3 program. We do that in this phase 1/2 study, and that means when we go into the phase 3 program and go into the agency discussions, we have a very solid basis for having that discussion, and therefore mitigate a lot of the risks that is normally associated with the phase. I think that's it for this slide. Then we were very happy that we was awarded as the best IPO in 2019. Of course, we had a very nice increase in the price, but I think more importantly for us were actually the quality award we got, where we got a quite high marks compared to the small companies. We were at that time, at least in the micro cap segment, and one of the issues there is that generally speaking, I mean, the lower the market cap, the more flags you get from something that is not perfect, but we actually have very low flag and with that very high quality. So we were quite appreciated for this award, and it helped us a lot in the Swedish market, particularly where it's very well known. In Denmark, it's not at all known, I will say, this award, but anyway, it was quite important for us to get in contact with a lot of the Swedish investors. So the next 12 months, which is always very important for a company being listed, is think about the Newsflow, and we have some very key event coming up. Our first study here, we have the safety, we have the proof of concept, the magnitude of benefit, we have the feedback from the regulatory discussions with both European and the US agencies. We are looking into other indication, and that will expand the value again of the company by having proving that it also works in a more frequent cancer like breast and lungs. We will do all the commercial scale manufacturing and also do all the work for starting the phase 3 study. And then last but not least, we will develop a small portfolio of uPAR targeted product, so we are able to fully utilize this in the market. And that is something to do with partnering. It's easier to partner one product at a time, or it's price differentiation, so we can charge different prices for the different indications. So there will be kind of some kind of important features there, but all that will come in the next year. And then pro and cons for the IPO. That's what I should speak about. First, I will just tell about the journey, because that actually highlight all the issues actually we went through. So in the beginning of 2018, we started out, Andreas and myself. We thought that the Fluoguide had a good basis for being listed, but also that it was interesting in general. And we looked into the plans. So we developed mostly, of course, I did the last part of the commercial part, and Andreas did the science part. We did the presentation, the budget, how we want to approach the market, really the business plan. And then from before April to October, we went out visiting investors, partners, advisors, all kind of stakeholder we could think of. And the reason for that was to get the feedback on our thoughts and our hypothesis on what we thought was good and bad. And part of that, and a very important part of that, of course, was also the financing. So we met venture capitalists, we met industry companies, we met some of the advisors taking it public to an IPO, and all that we did through October. And in the period, we decided that Fluoguide had a lot of characteristics that made it the perfect for public offering. We selected the Spotlight and we selected the Danish brands of the Spotlight, and we went out doing the price sounding, which was a kind of an important exercise to do the IPO. What happened then were that the price actually in the market, or the general share price, was actually decreasing 10%, and that was the red bar about October. And that was right after we had done the price checking. So we got a very good feedback that everything looks fine and we would get a good price and raise a lot of money. And then just the whole stock market just collapsed, went down with 10%. And that's just to say that one of the things with going public is that one is very dependent on things happening outside of the company. Of course, this can also happen for when you go for the VC funds, but that's other things often that happen. Here it was. It gave us a lot of troubles because it would not allow us go ahead as we have actually planned to. So we have to revisit the price, revisit the amount we raise. We have to revisit a lot of the things. We did all that. And in January, we agreed that we pushed ahead with it with some refined conditions. And we did the pre-IPO investment in the end of January, and then the IPO in May. And that was kind of our journey. And if I take the next slide, I just take some of the elements to it. So why doing an IPO at all? And traditionally IPOs is seen very much as an exit that is from the current shareholders selling their shares. And I think one important thing is that a small IPO, which often is the case when you do an IPO on Spotlight, because it's an early stage, a smaller market cap you have company, and then it's not an exit. I mean, it's a fundraising event, and it's particularly the case for the founders. I mean, of course, you can sell your shares, but I think it's a very theoretical thing, because if you do, the investors will just punish you very hard for that and run away. So I think that in practice, one have to see it as a fundraising event, and that's it. And for us, Andreas and myself, that started out, it was absolutely fine. It's how we see it, and we're in it for the long run. But don't think you should go in and look at it as anything else than that. One thing that as well is very important, I think Katrine mentioned it to employees, but I think it's also important to end users, doctors, patients for us, that you have a possibility to communicate to them. And a lot of our a lot of our investors are also potentially patients. That means that a lot of people actually invested in the beginning said, well, if I lose my investment, at least I've done something good. So I think that kind of play that into the communication is quite nice by being publicly listed. So I think that when this is said, I think it's important always consider other kind of routes for financing, and bootstrapping I think is by far the best if possible. Early partnering, VCs, angels and grants. And I think quite importantly, there's no good or bad way of investments. I mean, there's only good and bad fits. And I think, for instance, going public with a company that needs a lot of money early could be extremely dangerous, and that will not be the right thing to do for such a company. Then it may be much better to go for the VCs, for instance. So I think that doing the homework, trying the different financing and find the right way for the company, it's really, really important. And then I think that in my experience, at least, shareholder issues is always, almost always the cause of failure for a company. And I think there's it just sometimes we hear people say, oh, it's so difficult, you have so many shareholders by being a publicly listed company. But I must say that I also have a lot of trouble having a VC that is the only investor in the company. They can also be very, very problematic. And I think that a founder as well often also is shareholder and also create a lot of trouble. So I think all shareholder issues is just generally have to be a key focus for being successful that this is handled, and that also of course goes with a public listed company. But I think it's no different than any other company. So why should you do it? Do the IPO, and when should you do it? I think that you will often hear that, well, you should wait until you have a mature company. And I think that's pro and cons. I mean, if you do it early, of course, you have a thin news flow. You don't have so many things that are happening. It's much more difficult to predict timing and what kind of events will come up. Your low market cap is giving you less flexibility, and particularly raising money, because if you raise a lot of money with a low market cap, you really get punished by your investors. They don't like that, and for good reason. It's much easier to do that with a VC funding, but it then have some other drawbacks. You also get much more control of your destiny when you do an early IPO, and that was the key reason for Fluoguide to go that way, because we don't know exactly if we end up as an IT company, as a medtech company, or what, a drug company. So we decided that going out publicly on the public market will give us a lot more flexibility, developing the company to the best of the company, utilize the potential in the company, not developing to the best of some particular investors that just have a large say in the shareholder agreements and so on. But doing it late, of course, you will have more stakeholders, you have more investors to please. That make it complicated. Sometimes it will be considered as the second best option because you cannot sell the company. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that where the VCs have tried to sell the company, cannot do it, then they IPO'd it. And I don't think that really is a good way to go. And I think actually is well, can be quite bad. And then I think that in general speaking, I mean, late IPO is a general view, except from in Sweden. I mean, it's much more accepted in Sweden that you go out early. And I think that is the beauty of that route. And then last, I think there's never a perfect timing. It's like getting children. I mean, if you just wait and wait, you never get them. And if you get them too early, it could be quite troublesome. So I think you just have to jump out in it when you're kind of ready. So never perfect timing, and you have to, of course, to do it at some stage. Then country, what should you choose? I mean, I say that the spotlight is listed here both in Denmark and Sweden, and I speak about how it's perceived, not how it's legally organized. I know it's a Swedish company, Swedish exchange, and with a Danish branch, but it's perceived as the Danish brand is perceived more like a Danish exchange, at least from the shareholder investors I speak with. So we had the thinking, should it be First North Denmark Spotlight? If you want to go in Denmark or Sweden, it could be First North Sweden and Spotlight. I think that in Sweden we have a lot more of developed infrastructure, so it's quite professional. Also, the investors they will just call you or write to you if you don't like you or don't like what you're saying. You have them in the phone, and I think that's actually nice. I think in Denmark they're more polite, a little bit more. They're not so aggressive when they approach you, and I think that's of course also nice. But it is just that it's what can I say? I'm not saying it's not professionally, but it's just that it's not as pushy actually as it is in Sweden. And I think that in Sweden it's very highly competitive. I mean, there's a lot of companies that ask for money, and you have to be prepared to be really fight harder to get recognized. In Denmark, we have the advantage that it's not so competitive, so you can easier make yourself kind of known or visit or shown. But I think that whatever you do, I think the focus really should be that you make an outstanding investment case, and you should just keep focusing on that. There's a lot of emotions, what's best and what's not best, and some investors will like it the one way and the other way. But still, I think that doing a good investment case, that is what you should focusing on. And then, in all honesty, the exchange you choose matters less. But Spotlight has been great for us. It served the purpose we wanted, and it's been really great. If I may have the next one. So what amount to raise? And I think that the Swedish model, you have to accept that. If you go into Spotlight or go to the First North in Sweden, you kind of have to accept the Swedish model. And that is that you have to prove your worth by asking for quite a small amount of money to start with. You show that you handle them wisely and satisfactory for the investors, and then you can ask for more. It's very similar to a VC deal actually, where you get the trans investment. So it's not that it's what can I say, surprisingly, but you just have to be aware of it. And then we started out with very low valuation with purpose, because it's a very good way to write your first chapter in your equity story, that it has a good increase in the market. You can never kind of change that. And if you consider what it costs you to raise money when you have had a down, or can say that the share price have gone down, you have to do a lot of discounts and kind of insurances with the investors, and it costs you a lot of money to raise money on that point, and that also gives dilution. So we consider that it would be far better for us to make a low valuation to start with, and that's actually the best way to protect us, and it's great for our investors. So we have some very happy investors right now. Then I think, though, that you have to think about the full funded case. What I mean with that is that you cannot go out being a publicly listed company in Sweden with a low market cap and then expect to raise, you know, amount of money that corresponds to your market cap, for instance. That's just a no-go. And if you know that already, to start with, the IPO in Sweden is not the right way for you to go. So I think that you have to consider very carefully what would you need of funding down the road to be able to make a success. Not because the IPO is just the start of the journey. It's not kind of the end of it. So you have to be successful after the IPO, not kind of up to it only. And then I think there is a risk in the Swedish model that is to be underfunded, and you have to be very cautious about that. But otherwise, I think it's a great model for many companies, and if you do it wisely, think about it, it's a great model. So it's difficult, expensive, and I think that really not really. Actually, I think if the hard issues, I mean, you have to have a board, and you have to be a management that do things professionally. And if you do that, it's like in any company. I mean, you have to do your accounting, you have to be aware of your cash flow. So it's not really any change to running any company professionally. And of course, you have to be aware of your legal agreements. It cannot float around. You have to do them properly. You need to have a good infrastructure, be due diligent really, and you need to have a good plan really. If you have that, I think all the hard issues is in place, and it's really not difficult. Then there's a soft issue. When I say equity story, it's like when telling really, you have to be able to think about your next chapter in your story all the time, because what happened? You have done the IPO, you had promised some deliverables, you have delivered them, and then what's then? Then you have to tell a new story, kind of thing. That what will you do next with your company? And you have to see your company can be increasing in value a number of times as you go into it. You cannot just be the first round. You have to really think of, you know, years ahead. So I would say that really try to think around the corner and the corners. What happened next with you? I mean, that's very important. Also in terms of risk, what happened if you know, if some of the deliverables is not coming true? What will you do then? So really think all those things through and kind of make a kind of war game plan with yourself is very important. Then I think one thing I mean, I think it's very obviously, but you have to interact with your investors, and you have to build a relationship when you don't need it. And that's no different from this to any other companies. I mean, you always have to be very close to your shareholders, even those you don't like. I mean, you have to be very close to them. You have to understand what they want and how they want it, and you have to compromise. I mean, the different views you have in your shareholder basis. I mean, that is part of the job being a CEO. And then, of course, you have to be prepared to be exposed. I mean, when you go down the bakery on a Sunday morning and you look like something the cat had just taken in from the night, I mean, then you meet one investor that will ask you some very tough questions on some of the things. So you have to be prepared all the time that you can get the questions from you know, the most unexpected times and side on what you're doing. But I mean, just be yourself and be honest all the time. I think that's what to do. And so to answer the question, I think it's not at all difficult, expensive. In particular, I think it's just running any other companies. Yes, I think that's all I had to say. I think you're muted, Katrine.
Thank you so much, Morten. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. It was very good insights and learnings. I really like the point about how you work with making the amount that you raise part of your equity story. We have, and Emma has gathered questions beforehand from participants and other stakeholders, and we'll have a conversation based on these. You listed in spring of 2019, and you've experienced quite a development since this, and you were even awarded IPO of the Year. That's quite an achievement. The IPO, a question I often get is, how much time do you need to take out? And how do you do it internally in your team? Do the CEO only? Did you do everything, or did you split it with other roles? And how much time did it actually take?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it doesn't really take so much more time than it takes to run and VC-backed company, for instance. I mean, when you have a VC-backed company, you also have to. They have a management presentation. They have an investment board. They have. They are, getting up, fighting with each other in the group with the different VCs of what you should go right or you should go left, and you just spend a lot of time manage that as well. So I think that you have to manage any kind of shareholders, and I don't think that. I spend more time really here than I do in any other company I've worked in. And in terms of who's doing it, I mean, it's myself, and then very luckily I have Andreas Kjær, the scientific founder, and he's very good in a sense to communicate with the public, because he's very good at taking it the technical and just make it very easy to understand. So I'm blessed with having a good CSO, and it will say it's him and myself that is doing most of the presentations. Well, I think that, of course, we spend time on some of the things, of course. And I would say that we have to learn communicating in the start. I mean, there's a lot of legal, formal things we have to do. And of course, we needed to learn that, and we spend some time on that. But it's like getting an EU grant. I mean, you get an agreement on 200 pages, and you just have to read it from one end to the other and understand it. It's the same by being publicly listed. Better do that in the start so you learn the rules. And then I think Spotlight helps a lot in guiding you. I mean, taking the worst stupid things you do in your press releases, clean that out. So I think that's very good, actually. So don't think it's that difficult, really. But of course, it takes time. But I think it takes time in any company. And I think that what I hear sometimes is that people have not invested the time where they don't needed it. I mean, because being publicly listed, funny enough, is quite peaceful, because you don't get the pressure from your investors all the time. I mean, they can be silent for 3 quarters or 2 quarters, and then you just get the sensation that, well, there's no one to push you. But that doesn't mean you should stand still, of course. You should just keep moving and push yourself. And I think compared to a VC-backed company, then you have the push all the time in another way. So actually, you can become a little bit lazy, in fact, I will say. So you should take care of that. You should keep the discipline in the team, that you push yourself all the time. And that you can create by having, for instance, some board members that either help you push you, or you can build that spirit into your team. But that is one thing I see, and then I see that if that happens, then you kind of disappear for the surface for 2 or 3 quarters, and when you go back to the market, they kind of forgot you, and then you have to wake them up again a little, and that could be, of course, very hard. So I'm just saying that it's enormously important to build a relationship when you don't need it. But that is in all matters. I mean, marriage, everyone, you have to invest when you don't need to.
Some good points. The IPO process, there is this process that you also talked about when you go out with the investors, and then there's a process that is actually directed more towards Spotlight, where you have to live up to our demands and requirements. How did you feel that process was?
I mean, I think that most of your demands and requirements is trying to, with the aim of creating a professional management of the company that is transparent and that all the shareholder can see it. And basically, I mean, every company should work like that. So I think there's very few of the requirements that is not making sense. Of course, there are a few of the things that is a little bit bureaucratic, because it has to be when I mean, there'll always be like that. But I think, generally speaking, I mean, it's more a question of understanding why the rules are there, and then live up to being a transparent and well-managed company. I mean, every company should be like that, and every investor would like to see that, of course. But not all can force you to do it if you don't do it yourself. But then, of course, Spotlight will go in and help manage that. But you should never, in my view, you should really aim not coming in a situation where Spotlight force you to do something. I mean, you should try to do it voluntarily, because it's how it should be, of course.
And do you then also feel that the process somehow contributed to strengthening your organization and your business, or how is that?
I said not so much, but it's not because it didn't. I mean, it's just because that I have a lot of. I've been running many companies before, and with VC-backed companies, and with some quite tough board members and so on. So I've kind of tried a little on everything. So I felt that I was not surprised by, but yeah, I would say that. But it was there was no really surprises in the Spotlight regulations. I think they were all kind of pretty straight and fair. But I think it's the same for the other exchanges as well. I mean, of course, there is that you have to be things have to this when you have the inside information. That is something you have to get a little bit used to. That people can call you and say, "Oh, should I buy some shares?" And you say, in old days when you have a private company, you could be tempted just start speaking. And of course, you cannot speak, and you have to educate them that you cannot speak and you cannot tell it. When your sister comes to call you and say, "Hey, should I buy some shares?" And hey, sister, you cannot ask me that question because that's not really allowed to. And then you say, oh no, I didn't. Oh yeah, I didn't thought about that. So you have a lot of this kind of thing. But except from that, it's I mean, it's quite straightforward.
That's good to hear. If you've been given a lot of very good advice today. If you were to give only 2 advice, also based on what you now know, if you were going to give 2 pieces of advice to a company that was considering a listing, what would that be?
Well, I think that first of all, check out if the listing is the best from the company, and if the listing is the best from the company, I would say make a very firm decision. A lot of companies make it half. They say, maybe I would like to be listed, and if you start doing that, it's kind of I mean, you never kiss the frog if you don't kind of decide to kiss the frog. So if you want to kiss the frog, then kiss the frog and get out getting listed. So I think that is quite important.
Okay. It'll turn out to become a prince.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's not a prince, but then okay, I mean, you cannot wait all the time. Then all the frogs are gone. So.
But and then what made you choose Spotlight for a listing?
But that was the Danish branch. We kind of in Fluoguide we have grown out of Denmark. I mean, it's come out of the Danish hospital, Danish university. So we have a very international view on things, but still we were born out of Denmark in a sense, and we want to utilize that because of course that gives us some advantages in some infrastructure discussion here in Denmark, of course. But we also wanted to tap into the Swedish expertise on how the whole Swedish infrastructure market is working, and that's what I actually was a good combination because it's a Swedish exchange and it's a Danish branch, and we see that as a perfect thing. And sometimes we consider ourselves as a kind of Swedish company, and sometimes a Danish company. We kind of played when it makes the most sense, and also we managed to have a cornerstone investor both from Sweden and Denmark, and we actually use that because now we try, of course, building further on that so we can build both on the Danish market and on the Swedish market. And there's no doubt that the structure in the 2 markets are very different, but we was not kind of afraid of the Swedish competitiveness because it is a very competitive market in Sweden. But we thought that okay, it could sharpen ourselves, and we went into the market as well. So we kind of utilized both markets, and we thought Spotlight for us had been a very good choice for that purposes.
That's very good to hear. I can see that the time is it's very interesting, and we have a lot more questions. But Emma, if there are any participants that want to ask some questions, please send them to Emma in the chat function. And if not, because I can see that we're actually approaching the time where we should end this webinar, sadly. Emma, do you have anything that we have not addressed in these questions?
No, there are no new questions coming in from the participants now. So I think they found out what they needed to find out. And if not, you're more than welcome to email us, and we'll try to help you either get in contact with Martin or answer them ourselves.
So good. Thank you for tuning in. And I suppose that important takeaway, at least as I see it from Morten's insights, is that a growth IPO is a long-term commitment, where the initial IPO is a fundraising event. I think you phrased it. And I think that's a good key point to take with you. And also that the listing has provided Fluoguide with many tools, and that has been good for your further development.
That would be perfect for us. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, good. So if there are no further questions, I think that we will say thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.